monopoly laws, one of the arguments against, say, libertarians is that you would get the rise of monopolies, and the state is meant to protect us from monopolies. But it feels like within tech, we do have these monopolies, and not too much has been done to kind of curb them.
Well, so part of it's that there's kind of two different main views on monopolies. One is that part of the way they form in the first place is kind of working with government. Basically, that they get that kind of tie in with the government or get the kind of the government's blessing. They insert their cronyism. So if you look, for example, the biggest network effects, they also the companies they also spend the most on lobbying, right? So these big tech companies actually kind of became the biggest lobbyers over time in the United States. Whereas the more so that'd be kind of the libertarian view of it. That'd be their pushback, is they would say monopolies don't really form outside of kind of a government controlled jurisdiction, right? But the counterpoint to that would be, we don't really have an alternative test case because the whole world always is under some sort of government jurisdiction, and we do get these monopolies. And so I think that's a pretty complex subject. I mean, like decades ago, my mom was actually kind of an antitrust lawyer. She
Oh,
would go,
wow.
go after those, but it was kind of a losing battle. I mean, she was dealing with it back when like banks were in the process of consolidating before they were too big to fail, and we all know where that went. They eventually all did become too big to fail. But again, they're heavily tied into the Federal Reserve. They're heavily tied into there's that revolving door between financial regulators and the financial companies themselves. Most of those officials worked at places like Goldman Sachs and these other kind of firms. And so it can be hard to separate a corporate monopoly from the government monopoly. That's kind of one of the, I think, the overall issues is that when I talk about these big changes over time, these big cycles, cronyism ends up being a theme that comes back. Basically, power begets more power, and it can happen on both sides of the equation. Like for example, in the '70s, you had labor cronyism, right? You had these very powerful labor unions, and they would tie themselves heavily into politics. And then the advantage there is that workers would get paid pretty well, but the disadvantage is you get bogged down with inefficiency and just you can't get anything done. Whereas when you swing to the other side and corporations and those with capital have the power, they get tied into the cronyist. Then you have this massive wealth concentration and this kind of labor arbitrage, labor suppression. If you look at history, you tend to get these pendulums swing back and forth between who has the power, and the challenge there, the risk there is that if you start to notice the problem and then change policies to kind of push the pendulum back towards some sort of social contract that more people are fine with, that's kind of the wise way to do it. But in practice, if they don't handle it well, then the pendulum just slams so far that it breaks like the side of the case, and then you get like a revolution or collapse or something like that, and then nobody benefits. So that's always kind of these challenging points in history to navigate that happen every generation or two and represent kind of these big decision points that affect how the next several decades go in terms of which countries are in charge, which how what groups benefit the most.